Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. We are finished with Sagalong 2022, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I know I certainly enjoyed rereading Egil's Saga. It is a strong saga. I put it up there with Njal's Saga, which is probably my favorite. And it showcases the hallmarks of the great Icelandic sagas, that minimalist description, that very quick, fast pace that I really enjoy getting into. It feels different from modern novels. But it is, of all the sagas, I think it is the one that has a character at its center, based on a historical personage, of course, who feels the most modern. That as we got deeper into the saga, I felt like I was closer and closer to what we think of as the modern novel, with this central character who we were getting to spend time with and who we're getting to see develop. We reached the culmination of Egil's life, but also of his character, of his place within his family, within his community. As with a number of the Icelandic sagas that are sort of like family sagas, there is this sense of continuity within a person's life. One has ancestors, and a number of the sagas really emphasize that. We saw that in the first whole quarter of this saga. We were spending time not with Egil, but with his father, his uncle, his grandfather. Who were they? Who does Egil come from? And so we got to see that. Then we saw his own life. But then there is, in so many of the family sagas, this sense of continuity. Perhaps one does have children, as Egil did. But even if one doesn't have children, one is part of the community and one has a legacy within the community. There was a tradition of, fostering children, which occurred in a number of cultures. But there was an idea that one's foster siblings, who one had been raised with to a certain extent, were to a very large degree like one's brothers. The way that there was a very clear cycle of, vengeance, sadly, that would go through one's ancestors, and all the connections that exist within community meant that one could never really be totally separated from. And that's what made the outlaw judgment so powerful, to be cut off from everything that seems so important, that is emphasized in so many of the sagas, is a horrible, feeling for that individual. And yet with Egil, we saw someone existing right at the edge and the bounds of this society. He is a sort of warrior poet, certainly an outlaw poet, I would say. And it was fascinating to see, though, who he became at the end. That Egil would be chosen to be a judge at the end of his life. And so I really just wanted to emphasize that. I didn't want to necessarily go and summarize the plot. That could be done. But to me, it was interesting to see Egil's poetry again. When he has a son, Gunnar, and he dies shortly. My mouth strains to move the tongue, to weigh and wing the choice word. Not easy to breathe Odin's inspiration. In my heart's hinterland, little hope there. My sorrow the source of the sluggard stream, mind meandering, this heavy word mead. Poet's power, gold praised, that Odin from ogres tore in ancient time. Purest of possessions, poetic craft, power that dwarf devised drew first breath. Now feel it surge, swell like a sea, old giant's blood, about the cragged cliff face of the dwarf caves. A storm-bowed maple, I sorrow for my son, my boy who has bent his body to earth. Unhappy he whose kin is hewn down and must bear away the bones from the bed. I muse how my mother met her end. First that, then my father's fall I sing in a poem of praise. From my palace of words, from my temple, the word tree tells its growth tale. That is incredible. There is such a sense of beauty, of emotion, of passion that exists within Egil's character, and that coexists with all of the violence that permeates his life. He becomes such a fascinating character, Shakespearean in some respect, and he is very clearly based on a historical character, historical person. But the way in which his poetry gives this totally different side to him, creates this three-dimensional aspect that I found frankly incredible and just really enjoyable to get into. Now, of course, that same incredibly sensitive, incredibly beautiful poet, who I mean, honestly, in those passages, I feel is comparable to Tennyson in Memoriam. We also have Egil now realized that he could not go on like this any longer, having been drinking at a feast. He stood up and walked across the floor to where Armod was sitting. He got hold of him by the shoulders and thrust him up against a wall post. Then he spewed up a great torrent of vomit which gushed all over Armod's face, filling his eyes and nostrils and mouth and pouring down his chest. Armod nearly choked when he got his breath back, his own vomit spewed out. All the people of the household said that Egil was the crudest and basest of men. If he needed to vomit, he should have gone outside instead of making a spectacle of himself inside the drinking hall. Egil said, "Do not blame me for that. I am only following the father's example. He is spewing with all his might." No less than I. Everything's a contest with Egil, right? I'm proud to say that the Folio Society did include that illustration in Egil's Saga. What a great scene to illustrate. But as I mentioned, the poetry is beautiful. The poetry is incredible. And we also have a final sort of really cool, heroic poem, and a poem of that is a little bit more celebratory. It's not elegiac the way his poem is at the death of Gunnar. When he finally finds out that Bjorn, who we saw last week, has been restored to success, that things are maybe reestablishing in Norway in a more positive, benevolent way. And so Egil has this almost triumphant poem that he shares. He is, of course, asked to judge, and he metes out a furious judgment that is in keeping with the boy who was starting fights at ball games, violent fights. But then ultimately he ends, and we have his skull placed outside the church, which seems the most fitting place. And they go and they hack at the skull, and they realize there's this incredible, strange, almost mutated skull. And so there is this continuing sense that Egil is someone special. And it really has been fascinating and interesting to spend time with him, to get to know who he was, and to get to know his family. So this was Egil's Saga. He is in line with a number of outlaw poets. Francois Villon would be not quite a contemporary, but someone who was living within the same half millennium. And I have a volume of Villon's poems. I highly recommend those if you've never read any. This volume is fun because it has a number of the translations are from Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Algernon Swinburne. Another sort of outlaw poet might be the great Arthur Rimbaud. And so I think he's probably more famous than Villon, or certainly Egil. But they make sort of a group together. And then I should note that Stephen Moore, when writing about the Icelandic sagas, and Egil's Saga in particular, notes that Snorri Sturluson, who wrote a number of the sagas, is in some ways a precursor to Hemingway, the way that the minimalist description occurs. And I think it does hark farther back, that a number of the sagas were actually being written down in the aftermath of the conversion of Iceland to Christianity. And so I think there is a comparison to that sort of minimalist description that we find in the Gospels or in Acts, but it was then something that the realists sort of took and made incredibly ornate with loads of description. And then we saw within the modernists, there was this sense of stripping it back. Something that, again, the Icelandic sagas were doing a millennium earlier. So it was really interesting to spend time with the saga. I don't know what we're going to be reading next year, but I certainly look forward to it. So please let me know your thoughts. Let me know. Would you invite Egil to your party? I don't think I would. But have a great week, and I hope to hear from you. Thanks.